When we attained our democracy, we sought to distinguish ourselves from an unjust, painful past by declaring that never again shall it be that any South African will be discriminated against on the basis of color, creed, culture, and sex.
We need to say to you, there are millions and millions of people out there, people who are hurting, people who have been sidelined, people who are there and are not there. We know how you could be invisible in your own country. There are people who are invisible. There are people who speak and their words are not heard. And those people look to this conference as a beacon of hope.
This does not affect only sports, but it infects the entire human body politic. I'm therefore very glad that this initiative has been taken by our sports people, really to confront and uproot this cancer. For us who have had personal experience of the inhumane impact of racism, we really do have an obligation to make sure that we support.
Racism, in whatever form, is totally unacceptable, irrespective of which race is targeted by racism, by which race. Racism must be eradicated wherever it occurs, in all walks of life and in all activities and all disciplines. This also applies to sport.
Sometimes it's just a simple game, but often sport is much, much more than that. It's full of life's lessons. One of the lessons that sport must teach us is that it says no to racism. As a former rugby player and a South African, I say no to racism in society and no to racism in sport.
And that's how we welcome you to Interface here on SABC2. My name is Tembisa Magele. Penny Sparrow, Chris Hart, Gareth Cliff, Velapi Kumalo, the list goes on and on. And the question is, racism rearing its ugly head up again one more time in South Africa. Question being, what do we do about it? What can we do about it? That's what we're tackling tonight here on Interface, and we have our guests who are joining us to try and get to the bottom of this racism issue in our country. Unkgopotse JJ Tabane is a communications strategist and an author, and Dudu Msomi is the CEO of Busara Leadership Partners. And of course, as usual, you can comment. We do welcome your thoughts on our Facebook page. It is at Interface on SABC2, or on Twitter at Interface on SABC, or at Tembisa Magele. Welcome to both of you. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much for inviting
So
us.
it almost feels like we need to reload 2016. It's like, okay, time out. Can we do this again? Take two.
Time up.
What is going on, JJ?
Look, I think the flare-ups about racism and you know, the ones that have just happened this year are not new. We've had a few over the last couple of years. They really, for me, underline the need to revisit the issue of reconciliation. You remember that this was a big issue in the first 5 years of our democracy, and almost became a theme under which particularly our president then, Nelson Mandela, led us. And I think that, you know, it sort of tapered down, and we thought, oh, you know, it's now Uhuru, we're fine, until these incidents. If you look at incidents from the Free State, you know, remember the incidents with the students in the Free State urinating in the workers, you know, food, and then you had the likes of Steve Hofmeyr, you know, saying that, oh, in fact, blacks are the ones who are responsible for apartheid, and you name it. And then these recent ones, the latest being that we are monkeys. Now, all of that then says that the project of reconciliation is not complete, right? We've got to revisit it, because this is what is causing the friction.
Does it say the project is incomplete or the project has failed?
I think you have to be drastic to say it has failed. And I think that if you listen to the president over the weekend saying that there's a tiny minority,
Right.
I'm of that school. Although there are these incidents, you've got 54 million people in South Africa, thousands of corporations and so. Right? And you can count these incidents over the last 10 years maybe. Right? Of course, there are some that are not reported, but I think that if we say it has failed, that would be too drastic. I think we should be saying that we need to ensure that we don't ignore the fact that there's still healing that must happen. That's really the key thing here. The healing of memories, this terrible thing that have happened in this country. Are we completely healed? We are not. And that's not a closed project. I don't think we should say it's a failed project, but it's a project that requires attention. And I think when we're talking about the questions you're asking, what should we do about it? I think that that's what we need to tackle now, to say, as individuals, as corporations, as government, what should we be doing? And I think that these flare-ups, the recent ones, have now raised the issue of what must be done and in terms of tackling this instead of simply lamenting.
All right, Tutu, let me bring you in here. Two schools of thought. One is just a few people that are not worth getting worked up over, a few racists that we have amongst us, and we should just ignore them and move on. The other school of thought says the bulk of South Africans, white South Africans, are indeed racist, but because of survival in the new democracy, they've had to hide it and hide it well. Which do you buy?
You know, we emphasize reconciliation, but we don't really pay attention to reconstruction. This is a new country. We have new values. New South Africa is built on human dignity, equality, and freedom. Before 1994, those were not as treasured. And we've built a society and have not really looked at our own values. You know, in ideal societies, maybe you're able to build from scratch, blank slate, where people who do not subscribe to these values move out, and many of them did, but some of them did remain. And that's where it starts. Reconstruction, for me, has really not happened. That's where transformation happens. Transformation is changing from the old to the new. And that means really re-looking at everything. It's our value system that hasn't changed.
So when the president says, as he did over the weekend, when he says, we actually are a non-racial society. We have overcome racism. It's just that we have a few bad apples in our midst. We have a tiny minority, which is what you quoted earlier, JJ. Is that really a view you share?
I think the issue is that we should stop taking the rainbow, this rainbow, for granted. I think really that's my angle. My angle is not to say, oh, it's okay, we can just all fold our arms and move on. Hence I'm saying it's an incomplete project, this whole issue of reconciliation. And I'm deliberately focusing on the reconciliation thing because we can't afford a situation where there's a backlash, or rather there's a reversal of the gains made. Because the very birth of our constitution, right, as a document that's revered around the world with a Bill of Rights and so on, that's a big victory for the people of this country who did not resort to revenge. Now, if you have somebody like Velap who just wakes up and says, oh, just throw everybody into the sea, that's a person who should be ignored. And I think that the president is talking about the minority, is that you're not going to find that kind of vile response across South Africa. In fact, everybody will say, but this country, we need to protect what it has done and focus on dealing with issues that are facing our people, which are unemployment and so on. And that's why if you're asking the question, what must be done? I mean, I will start tackling that to say, as individuals, there's not going to be a big bang theory that's going to resolve the issue of reconciliation.
We've got to take a short break, and I do want us to talk about what should be done. But when we come back from the break, I want to hear your thoughts. Can we define ourselves as a non-racial society? That's what we're going to be tackling right after this break. To stay with us. And it's one of my questions. It's one of my questions, yeah. Welcome back. We're talking about racism once again in our country, and we are asking the question, can black people be racist? What is going on in our country? What are some of the solutions that we can get to? And we do welcome your thoughts as well on social media. If you can just hit us up on Facebook at Interface on SABC2 or on Twitter at Interface on SABC or at Tembisa Magele. So before the break, to the question I was asking you, can we indeed define ourselves as a non-racial society with a few tiny bad apples amongst us who are racist?
You know, every country has a vision that they're working towards. Our vision is to be non-sexist and non-racial. So we're not necessarily a non-racial society, but that's what we're thriving to be. So what happened in 1994 is that racism went covert. It's politically incorrect to be racist, so you do other things. There are reasons why transformation hasn't worked in the private sector. There's a reason why public sector has evolved more than private sector. In private sector, the values haven't changed. So you may not be hostile towards black people or Africans or Indians or coloreds, but your actions prove that you're not embracing. Racism, the definition is usually the belief that you are superior to another race. So there is something that is still unconsciously playing itself out. I mean, sometimes when you talk the way we do, or you do the way the things you do, people like look at you as like, oh my gosh, as though as a black person you have no ability to do that.
What school did you go to?
You know, things like that.
Worst question ever.
This year we're going to be 22 years on.
Right.
You mean to tell me that we still deserve a country where 76% of our top management is white? You mean to tell me in 22 years we have had no ability to grow and develop and promote black people into those positions? That just shows that there is something that is stopping the transformation from happening. And we just have to call it what it is. It's racism.
Racism
Absolutely.
in the private sector.
Yeah,
Your
it
thoughts?
manifests itself really in terms of the resistance to change, unfortunately, in the private sector. If you look at it, I mean, the recent statistic, over 60% of all new promotions, over 60% of all new appointments, 22 years after democracy, to white people. Right? So they're not going to say to you, oh, we actually don't want to hire blacks. But when you look at the numbers, they tell you a story of resistance to change. And that's what then, and that's the lesson that the people working in those corporations, that's the lesson that they take. So now you wake up one day, yes, there's a Chris Hart, you're going to show us or pretend to be dealing with a Chris Hart, but when you look at your transformation record, it shows us that in fact he's reflecting exactly that which you are trying to, you know, to resist or rather to pretend that doesn't exist. So I agree completely there that there is a level of manifestation of institutionalized racism in the private sector that still needs to be dealt with. And for me, that's where it comes in terms of individuals. Part of why racism is fermenting wherever in these corners, it's a lack of activism. Activism has disappeared by all of us. You know, you go and work in a corporation, you are the only black person in the room. You know, after 2 or 3 meetings, you realize, hey, these people are resisting. Let me just keep quiet and earn my bonus and go home, right? Because otherwise, if you keep talking like this, you'll be out and they'll replace you with another black. And this is what you have seen. Many black people will tell you, when you arrive at a corporation and there's a black person there who has been there for 10 years and there's no change, you then wonder, what have you been busy with?
But it's one against, you know, how many?
Precise, but activism is like that. Activism is exactly like that. That's why it's called activism, because you've got to actively do something that the rest of the other people may think it is normal.
Yeah,
and I think that's part of the trouble.
That is part of the problem. I think we've tasted a few crumbs of this new democracy in terms of some affluence, and so now we are too scared to take any risk. This is not real freedom. When you don't have your own destiny in your hand, it's not real freedom. When you depend on management fees or you don't have productive assets that you own, it is not freedom, which is why strategic positions are still handled by white people. So we ourselves have something in us that doesn't really believe that we deserve this democracy, that we deserve this freedom. We're the ones that need to make the change that we need in this country.
But how? Everybody says that, and we all agree. We've got to do something about it. But
For example, can I just give you an example?
Right.
We are called job hoppers as black people. Most of us, when we leave corporates, whatever a company you're leaving, you never give an honest exit interview. You always say there's a better opportunity. You never talk about exactly what is going on. because you don't want to burn bridges.
You see, it's the culture in the organization.
Yeah, we don't change anything.
Yeah.
And the thing is, part of how we got this democracy is we sacrificed. You know, our parents sacrificed, our families lost members. There was sacrifice. Economic struggle needs sacrifice. And sacrifice, you have to hit capitalism in the pocket. A lot of us are spending money in those very organizations we accuse of not having transformed. If you do not spend money there, and you are forced to develop and be inventive and creative and be innovative, and you create. I mean, a lot of things that South Africa has created came when apartheid really sanctions squeezed them. They had to be creative and innovative and develop financial services companies, SABC breweries and other things had to be really world class. And it came because there was a squeeze in terms of finance. We need to find where our leverage point is, and it's money, and we need to do things that kind of benefit us.
For the majority of South Africans, though, they'll tell you, I don't have the time to be thinking, if I can get something at, let's just use ShopRite as an example. I'm not saying they are a racist, please do go and buy from them, but I'm just saying as an example. It's right down the road, I go there, I buy my food there, it's cheaper than everywhere else. Why should I boycott them to try and make a statement?
So why should we change then? Why would the white capitalism change if they are not suffering? If there is no hurt? It's business as usual. And everybody's saying that in terms of the white population, and it's not everybody. Even during apartheid, there were white people who had an unpleasant time, even though they were privileged.
Right. Yes.
They were not all affluent. But the reality is that we need to hit them where it hurts.
Look, the issue is that the BE, part of why BE has failed so far, right, largely, is because black people don't support BEE. Because if we are saying that as a country, this is our policy, that if you are a business, you need to be able to be reflective of South Africa. It means that soon, if we all comply, there won't be a need to boycott anybody. So the key thing here is that individuals must brighten the corner where they are. If you are, whether it's in your soccer club or at your gym club or at church, if there's racism, you fight it there. If we all do that, we'll be able to really deal away with it. As corporations, are you implementing anti-racism policies? Are you implementing change in your corporate? As a corporation, that's the role that you should be playing. Government.
And maybe for the rest of us as South Africans who don't know whether or not a particular company is implementing the right policies, maybe we need to have a name and shame campaign.
Well, the media must play its job. Must do its job.
We've got to take a short break. We're back after this. And of course, we welcome your thoughts. To stay with us. So Ernest Zikwele went to our Twitter page at Interface on SABC2 and said, what is racism? What about my right to freedom of speech? Are there limits to freedom of speech? That's one of the questions, if we've got time, we will ask our guests here today. Peter Johnson says, very simply, blacks are racist as well. Pata Rachidi says, people choose to be racist, though I am not one. I can tell it's a burdensome thing to carry around. So let's start with the second one. Can black people be racist?
Well, if you believe that black people are superior to white people, then you are racist. However, if you just dislike, that's just prejudice. That is not racism.
Right. Second one, racism versus freedom of speech.
Well, all the freedoms in the Constitution are limited. I mean, you can't just sort of think that it's a free-for-all. So you've got to be able to say there's freedom of speech, but also responsibilities. There are other people who should be taken into account. I mean, to put it in simple language. So I think that where it's wrong is to believe that people must be shut down when they must speak. I think that we need to encourage more people to speak out against things that are wrong, and those who are saying wrong things will not know that they are wrong if they don't say them, so that we can correct them. So I think that the freedom of speech balances out in that way.
Freedom comes with responsibility.
No,
as long as your freedom of speech is informed by human dignity, equality, then you're fine. If those things are transgressed, you do not deserve any freedom of speech in South Africa.
So even when Penny or Penyo or Pemelo, however they've been calling her,
would we be having this conversation if she didn't speak out?
Yeah, she's saying no.
But
you know, she
but
likes
no, but
monkeys
you
and
can-
cutes.
But
You
now
know
we know
what?
where she
Just
stands.
because you can doesn't mean you have to. I think people need to have some emotional intelligence. Just because you can, you don't have to. If it's a worldwide phenomenon. Racism is a worldwide phenomenon.
Right.
So it's not just because of apartheid. There is a sense of white privilege which is pervasive throughout the world. However, you do not have to spew this into the public. And we know that around dinner tables, black people are called criminals. When people are held by gunpoint by a white person, they're in shock because they didn't know that hijackers can also be white.
In fact, Steve,
so we have these stereotypes.
Steve Hawkman said he doesn't know a black criminal. He's never met a black criminal.
So one
white
has
criminal,
to tackle white privilege. What does white privilege mean? And it's most of the time used as the benchmark. You know, so competence, when a white person is appointed somewhere, it's assumed that they're competent. When a black person is appointed, affirmative action doesn't mean that you're not qualified. It says for suitably qualified people so that they can have equal opportunities. However, racism bears itself out by those corporates deliberately get the incompetent people so that they can prove the stereotype that black people are incapable.
Just on that, then, the issue of qualifications and the fact that with Chris Hart, everybody who supports him says, look, recognition of prior learning. Would that have been done if it was a black person?
Look, I mean, it's clear that there was more noise if it's a black person, and we have seen a string of people who have been, called out and so on. I think that we should condemn, fraud, whoever conducts it, whether you are white or you are black. When you've got a job to do and you present yourself as qualified, be qualified. Don't come and tell us that the dog ate your certificate and have the entire country waiting for months for you to produce. So let's not do that. I think it brings me to the issue about the laws, whether do we need to pass new laws, right, to deal with this issue or not. And I think that's where maybe the role of government comes in. I was just going to have an intellectual seizure if I hear of any new law that's going to be passed. It's not necessary. The Constitution is clear about what needs to happen. We need to act on it. 2, we've got Section 9 institutions, right? Let's support those to do their jobs, right? Whether it be the Public Protector and the Human Rights Commission. If we just supported them just a tad more to do their jobs, we will not need to pass any new law, right? The attitudes of people is not going to be changed by a new law. I think that we need to have...
criminalize it, though, the way that, denying the Holocaust is done?
Well, the question is it not criminal right now if you actually do something of this nature?
You don't get jailed for it?
Well, I think that this is where the discussions must happen, whether the Human Rights Commission, the Public Protector, and all of these institutions, right, are able to find laws that they can use to make sure that we can fix this.
But the question is, should it be criminalized? Your thoughts?
That's an option. I think EU countries, some of them already have that, so it can be done. But, I mean, I think already some cases have been opened with regards to that. I just want to go back to the issue of experience. Let's not shoot ourselves in the foot. The recognition of prior learning is very important.
Absolutely.
There's the recognition of you don't have to be qualified in something to do something. However, there are professions where you cannot practice without having that qualification. So you have to have that differentiation. Whether an economist needs that, that's a question. Because if you're a doctor and you haven't had your 6 years and other things, we will not have you practicing. So let's not blanketly say if you're not qualified for that. If the profession requires you to have a master's or whatever in order to be called an economist, then it should be disclosed. Otherwise, because remember, affirmative action also was a way of getting women who in the past may not have that track record or the experience, and you recognize their prior experience.
And their potential. Because people can grow into the jobs, people can go into learning on the job and so on. I think that what is key for me is that people should not falsify and give us a wrong impression about what they are qualified.
We've run out of time. Naming and shaming, should we do that?
Very important for me.
Yes.
We have black organizations, black membership organizations, professional organizations. If you want to impact on transformation, whether it is the Lawyers Association, the Accountants Associations, the Management Associations like the BMF, when these corporate members join our ranks as members, we need every year not to renew them unless they are showing some progress.
That's right. We're going to have to leave it there. Thank you very much to both of you for coming to talk to us about this. Let's continue the conversation on our Facebook and Twitter pages. Good night.